Throwing the ball in cricket causes way more injuries than it should, whether it's a shoulder, elbow, or elsewhere. And in this video today, we're going to understand why those injuries occur, but more importantly, how we can prevent them from a strength and conditioning point of view. First of all, let's look at why injuries might happen when we're throwing a ball. If we think about the throwing position, there's a couple things we need to understand. First one is that our hand is ultimately overhead. The further our limbs, and by limbs, really our feet and our hands are away from our body, away from the center of mass, the more likely we are to potentially get injured because we're going to be a little bit less stable. To be nice and stable, if you wanted to be really stable, you'd kind of curl up into a ball. Because our elbow is going away from our body and our hands overhead, we straight away kind of create this level of instability. So that's point number one. It's an overhead action, which is going to make it a little bit unstable. Point number two of why they occur is in a game of cricket, in a season, in a week, when we're training, we do it a lot. We repeat it, we repeat it, we repeat it, we repeat it. With most injuries, the reason why the injury actually happens is because it's an overuse injury. We look at fast bowling, stress fractures in the back. What's the main cause of a stress fracture? A spike in bowling workload. Too much bowling, too much bowling. Other injuries might happen. Runners, their knees will get injured, their hips, their feet, everything will get injured normally when they're doing too much and they've had a spike in workload. Exactly the same thing with throwing. If we have a spike in workload, our elbows, our shoulders, the points that are the kind of weakest and going to be the most unstable in that, or at the most risk of injury in that position, are going to take the brunt of that force, and they're then the areas that are going to get injured if we're doing too much too soon. So with everything we do physically, we ideally want to build things up and down nice and gradually to reduce our risk of injury. And point number three with why it will happen is because we're not just throwing nice and softly at the wall like I am there. We're giving it the full beans and we're throwing as hard as we can. So we're doing it at a high speed. Now, if you think about maybe an elbow injury, forces when you're throwing, so in there you kind of got a lag behind and all the force is going to go through the inside of that elbow, not all the force, but high majority of the force is going to go through the inside of that elbow, and that's where it's kind of all going to meet, and then that's the area where you're probably going to get the injury. The same in our shoulder, because you're doing it at such high speed. So with high speed stuff, normally the injuries actually happen on almost the part where when you're unable to decelerate. So I like to say with the human body, you need to think of it as a little bit of a car sometimes, and it's a really good analogy to have. You wouldn't build a car where you've got a really fast accelerator pedal that it can go 200 miles an hour, but the brake pedal is, let's say your accelerator is a Ferrari accelerator, but your brake pedal is my Volkswagen Fox, that when I get up to 80 miles an hour, it's shaking. Okay, so you're not gonna have a car where you can go really quick, but your brakes aren't able to do it. Normally also in the human body, on the front side of our body, we've got muscles that create force and are like our accelerator. So upper body wise, our pecs are our accelerator, and normally our posterior side, so on our back, so our rotator cuff, is then the thing that slows us down. Slowing you down when you go through this motion is actually where you then kind of get that whip effect, and that's what causes the ball to come out at high speed. So deceleration is just as important as acceleration, but if you haven't got the facilities for that deceleration, your body isn't going to let you go quick enough, so it's not going to kind of risk you getting injured. So it's going to basically put a limiter on your speed. So by improving the muscles that are going to help us decelerate safely, that's also then going to give us the ability to go even quicker and quicker and quicker and throw harder and harder and harder. So with strength and conditioning, there's always two key goals. One of them is improve performance. The other is reduce risk of injury. When we think about throwing, we want to reduce the risk of injury, elbow, shoulder injuries, but we also want to improve our performance. We want to be able to throw quicker, more accurately, more consistently, more often. So now we understand why shoulder, elbow, other injuries might happen when we're throwing. Now we're going to go on to a section where we focus on how to prevent them. So for prevention, there's three key areas that I want us to focus on. The first of those key areas is going to be our shoulder mobility. So shoulder mobility is typically something that in the modern day and age, and when people first come to CricFit, is something that's normally not great because a lot of us have pretty bad postures. So our shoulders, instead of being back and down, our shoulders are normally up because we're really tight for our traps, and our shoulders are also normally kind of rolled forward because we spend all of our day in this position. What that then means is our shoulders are like a little bit stuck and we can't move. And with shoulder mobility, you need to think about your shoulder blade, so your scapula, which is attached on here, and you need to think about that and the relationship it has to your rib cage. So your rib cage obviously goes around here, your scapula is on the back. Now, ideally, this scapula should be able to move, I'm just gonna come a bit close to this camera, this scapula should be able to move all the way around our rib cage. So now it's around here and it's up there and all the way back down into there. So we should have a nice range of movement. Now, for me to be able to do that, I've set my shoulders back and down, and then I've got a really nice kind of movement and range of motion. If my shoulders are hunched and forward to start with, my shoulder blade is already round in this position, which means to get up overhead, I'm kind of locked in here. I've got nowhere to go. Whereas actually, if I can open up in there, open up through my shoulders, and everything's a bit more mobile through there, then got a lot more range of motion. So where shoulder mobility gets us into issues is because we need to be able to get our hand overhead. It's not quite as bad as bowling. So in bowling, you see a lot more lateral flexion because you have to have your arms straight, which means the hand has to be a lot higher. So if you're really struggling through this shoulder, unless you're trying to bowl like Malinga and you're struggling with shoulder mobility, you're not going to release the ball from there. You're going to lean over to create some artificial mobility and release it from here. With throwing, it can be a little bit safer than bowling, which is good news because we're allowed to bend our arm, but still we need to be overhead, and still we need that scapula to be able to nice and smoothly flow around our rib cage. So we're going to need good shoulder mobility in going overhead, but also then for our thoracic spine being able to rotate. Let's now look at 3 different exercises which we can do to just open up those shoulders and feel a little bit better and ultimately help you to prevent throwing injuries. These 3 exercises, if you do them, will help. It's not the only thing that's gonna obviously help you with your throwing, but they're just 3 little snippets and I'm just gonna give you to be helpful. The first one is just gonna be getting our hands overhead. I'm gonna focus, it's called shoulder flexion. So we're gonna start with your hands flat on the floor, try and have your shoulders back and down like we've just practiced. And then very simply, we're gonna keep our arms straight and take our hands over to the floor. What we aren't gonna do is we're not gonna arch our back because that's then creating artificial mobility. We're gonna try and keep our back flat on the floor as we bring our arms over. And I'm actually pretty tight today, so this is quite refreshing. And in that position, just hold it. Now, if that's too hard, go thumbs up to start with, and you don't have to move quite as far. But just get really comfortable in that overhead position. And normally, just taking some nice deep breaths really helps. With all mobility exercises, and especially upper body mobility, why deep breathing really helps and why a lot of people are really invested in their breathing is because really most of the muscles in the upper body are attached to the rib cage. And if you breathe really deeply, you're expanding the rib cage and compressing the rib cage. And with that, all the muscles are getting a stretch even if you're not moving. So just from breathing really deeply and longly, does that make sense? You're gonna be stretching your muscles, okay? So that's exercise number 1. The second one you can do for shoulder mobility is just a kneeling rotation. So I like to go hands on opposite shoulders, elbows level with shoulders, and rotate into your knee, and then have a nice stretch behind you. Rotate in, stretch behind you, and you'll feel it all down your side. And then the final one, which is an absolute staple in pretty much every program all over the world, is a child pose. So sit on your heels I'm just gonna take this off because you'll lose audio, I imagine. And then reach as far forward as you can. Once again, nice deep breaths. And reach around to the left, get a stretch down your right side. Reach around to the right to get a stretch down your left side. So there are 3 different shoulder mobility exercises that you can do. And now we're gonna go on to area number 2 for prevention of shoulder injuries, shoulder and elbow injuries whilst throwing. The next area we wanna work on with our throwing is our rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is something which everyone seems to mention and talk about. I don't think many people actually know what it is, as bad as that sounds, unless you're like obviously an S&C coach and you know what you're talking about. A lot of people talk about it, think they know what they're talking about, but actually they don't really know, it just sounds cool. It's one of these things that is quite trendy and sounds cool, but let's understand actually what it is a little bit deeper. So the rotator cuff is a group of 4 muscles attached to the scapula, and these muscles then attach onto various points around your shoulder joint. The 4 muscles, which I'll drop a diagram in here. 4 muscles, you can see the names, they're really long, they sound fancy. But basically just group them together into the rotator cuff. They all have slightly different roles, but ultimately their job is to stabilize the shoulder joint. So they work together to allow us to get our elbow level with our shoulder, get our hand overhead, and do that in a nice, stable and safe manner. If our rotator cuff muscles aren't activated, if they're not strong, if we don't really know how to engage them, if we never engage them, then naturally when we get into this position, they're gonna do absolutely nothing. And then our elbow and shoulder are really exposed. So it's really important that we have a big focus on the rotator cuff muscles so that we can throw nice and safely. So let's look at 3 different exercises that we can do for our rotator cuff. The first one we're gonna do is a kneeling pull, rotate and press and repeat. So with a band strapped on somewhere, go into a kneeling position, pull it back to elbow height, rotate it, press. Oh, I've made this a bit hard for myself. Back down, rotate and repeat. A little bit hard for myself, so I'm gonna go in a little bit. Now, the key thing with this one on the rotation is trying to keep this elbow as still as possible. It's still quite a heavy band. So on that part, now what a lot of people will do is they'll kind of pull back with their shoulder. So rather than keeping this part still, they'll just use these strong muscles to pull it up, and that's not activating our rotator cuff. So why a lot of people struggle with rotator cuff exercises is because they're really easy to do badly. And by badly, we're gonna basically use the stronger muscles to do them. So it's really important that when we do them, we're really strict. So there, try and keep that elbow as still as possible, and then rotate. And it's a really tough exercise if you do it well. Now, if that's too hard or you haven't got a band, this one literally anyone can do. And I'm just gonna bring you a little bit closer here, just so you can get a good view of this. This could be a door frame, it could be anything, and it could even be a person that you're gonna push against. With this one, we're gonna do an isometric hold. Isometric holds are really good because we get a lot of muscular contraction without having to move. It's really important with this, like I've said before, we set our shoulder back and down. And then what we're gonna try and do is we're gonna have our elbow pinned into our body. So pin that in, then we're gonna have a 90-degree bend in our elbow here, so it's not gonna be there, not gonna be there, 90-degree, and keep your wrist nice and strong. Then all we're gonna do, into a solid object, we're gonna push in as hard as we can and squeeze. 3, 2, 1, and release. Now I feel that all engaging around those good muscles that we want to contract at the back. So 3, 2, 1, and push. So because I'm pushing inwards, that's an internal rotation we focus on. And then you can also do it at the back of your hand. So 3, 2, 1, and push. And it'll work slightly different areas. External rotation as we're going away from our body. Often, you'll see this exercise done really badly by people in warm-ups when they get a band and they give it this one. And they think that is doing their rotator cuff. The reason that isn't doing their rotator cuff is because that elbow is all over the place. So really, they're kind of just pulling with the stronger muscles and not activating the little ones. So if you are gonna do that exercise, do it exactly the same as what we just practiced. Pin that elbow in, and then that's the range of motion you can get. That's all you can get. And control it in, and you could let it go back all the way. And it should be really hard. If you're just doing that, you're not really doing anything. Sorry. The final exercise we're gonna do for our rotator cuff is with a dumbbell. So you really don't need a heavy dumbbell at all for this one. And this one is then just loading. So, and why we're including this one as well. So with the banded rotation, we brought it into there and we did external rotation. With the isometric, we did both internal and external. With this one, I'm on the wrong side. With this one, we're gonna focus more on really that downward phase. So we're gonna start on our side. Once again, elbow back and down, pin your elbow into your body. Now, I've only got 3 kgs here, but that'll be more than enough. Wrist nice and strong, and then you're gonna raise up without moving that elbow. Got really good contraction at the top, and I do this really slow, this exercise, and then control it down, and that's the important part. And then you can go into internal rotation a little bit, then back up to the top. Now, once again, you could do this really easily like that, but if you lock in that elbow, oh, it's a very good exercise to get really good engagement all through your rotator cuff. So that one I would say is a little bit, the banded one is a bit more, and the isometric a bit more activation. If you really want to strengthen, that's probably the #1 exercise for you. So I'd really add that into your gym work, then into your warm-ups, I'd add in the isometric and the banded pull and press. The final area we're gonna focus on with our prevention, so we focused on the shoulder mobility, we focused on rotator cuff activation and strength. Final area is just making sure that we've got no imbalances. So with this area, I haven't really got any exercises for you, because all I want you to do is make sure that your upper body is conditioned and it's nice and balanced. Most people go to a gym and they absolutely love chest press, bench press. I love chest press and bench press, great exercises, but they kind of get addicted to it and that's all they do. They're kind of the sexy exercises in the gym. The other sexy exercises are then bicep curls, and some people then do triceps. The issue is that the most common exercises people do upper body wise are bench press, which does your front side, bicep curls, which does your front side. If we now go back to the analogy of a car, the Ferrari, so you're basically building a Ferrari accelerator, but you're doing absolutely nothing for the backside, and you can't even do a pull-up, but you can still bench loads. What that then means is, one, you're gonna be very front side dominant. That's also then gonna mean you get very tight through this front side, and then you become very rounded. So that's gonna limit our shoulder mobility, like we said before, because the scapula can't move around the rib cage. And two, it's gonna mean that we've got a massive imbalance, so that then when we go to throw, our posterior side, so our back side, we can't decelerate safely. So a very easy tip with all of your strength training to really help you when you're throwing is for every one push exercise, so push exercises normally do our front side, so whether it's a bench press or a shoulder press, for every push exercise you do, you should be doing at least 2, if not 3, pulling exercises, such as a row, a pull-up, or a rotator cuff variation, like we've just seen with the dumbbell, the band, IYTW, so where you're on the floor and you're going IYTW, so anything around your shoulders. So that's the final tip to leave you with today in this video, is make sure that your ratio of your training in the gym is more pulling and backside dominant exercises than front side, so that you don't become rounded and you don't have those imbalances. I hope you found that video helpful and it's given you some actionable advice that you can take into your own training. If you're looking for a cricket-specific throwing S&C program, that's a tongue twister, then we have one on our website, which I will link in the description below and drop in a nice visual now. But if you're not looking for that, then that's cool. You've got 3 really good tips you can take away for you. take away and put into your own training. Work on your shoulder mobility, learn how to actually activate that rotator cuff, and make sure you've got a pull to push ratio of at least 2:1. Give this video a like if you've enjoyed it and you're still watching. Please subscribe to the channel and drop any comments below if you've got any questions. And if not, I shall see you again shortly when I'm back with more cricket specific fitness advice.